everyone. Welcome to another fun episode of the Co-Living Code Show. Christine here, CEO and founder of Kindred, which is software for the co-living industry. And this week I brought on a 16-year-old who is brilliant. You guys, your mind is going to be blown after seeing this interview. Isabella Grandic is an activator and futurist with the Knowledge Society. And the Knowledge Society is such a cool program for teenagers in giving them the skills and empowering them to impact billions of people in the future. So it's almost like creating unicorn people instead of unicorn companies. And Isabella Grandic, she works on technology concepts to integrate into businesses. She's worked on projects in machine learning, stem cells, 3D printing, and recently she's been super passionate about transforming housing in Toronto and eventually all other markets. And so from speaking at IKEA's annual festival to building a recommendation for Toronto's Sidewalk Labs, which all of you guys know, any of you guys that have seen me speak on stage, I always sneak in a rendering of Google's project Sidewalk Labs in Toronto because I'm absolutely obsessed with that project. So she is bringing a perspective on how we can change the way we live. And she speaks at conferences around the world like Web Summit and C2 Montreal, and is a part of the Human Accelerator. We mentioned TKS, which is the Knowledge Society. We got links below to check out. You guys are going to love this editor. So I'm just pre-warning you guys. You guys know I have a lot of energy. She matches it, if not more, and neither one of us had coffee this morning. So enjoy this fun episode this week with Isabella Grandic, or Izzy, and learning all about not just co-living, but we also dive deep into the sharing economy as far as sharing actual items. And yeah, so enjoy, you guys. Hello, everybody. Christine here with another fun episode of the Co-Living Code Show, where we bring on experts, leaders, passionate people about co-living every single week on Wednesdays, like clockwork. We are on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple iTunes, like anything, everything. I think the show is airing on each week. And this week, you are the youngest to come on the show. 16-year-old Izzy is on. She is working on my favorite project in the world, which most people that know me and actually have seen me speak on stage, I always sneak in a picture of Sidewalk Labs, just like a rendering. And everybody's like, what is that community? And I'm like, oh, this is Sidewalk Labs. It's a Google project in Toronto, Canada. And Izzy reached out to me to get my advice on co-living and said she's helping them, writing recommendations for that project. So Izzy, welcome to the show. We are so excited to have you. We're excited to talk co-living, excited to talk about the future. So let's start there. What made you interested? How did you get on the Google helping them with Sidewalk Labs? I know you're there in Toronto.
Yeah. So for some quick context, I'm part of a program called the Knowledge Society, and I've been there for about a year and a couple months now. So last year I started the program, and the best way to describe it is like Olympic level training for 13 to 17-year-olds on how they can solve the world's biggest problems. So the first year, there's a heavy emphasis on emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, like you name it, all fun new stuff happening in the world. And so I did that for a year. And within the program, we do challenges with different companies. So last year we worked with Walmart and Wealthsimple. And then this year, one of the challenges is with Sidewalk Labs. And so what they do is they give us a problem statement. It's very vague, and you just want to see what we can come up with. So after a year of looking into different emerging technologies, learning about how the world works, we just took the challenge in 3 weeks, and we tried to figure out what is the best approach to build more affordable housing with Sidewalk Labs Toronto Challenge. And so that's one of the things that TKS, the Knowledge Society, does. But we do a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's sort of how I got involved. It's because I'm part of TKS. So yeah, that's kind of my context.
No, and I love it. Let's talk a little bit more about TKS, because I hadn't even heard of the organization until you told me about it, a couple weeks back. And no, it's so cool, you guys, everybody listening. So, there's all these accelerator programs. We went through Techstars ourselves. So there's accelerator programs for companies, and there's a ton now. Well, this is technically an accelerator program for the leaders, the young leaders that, the unicorn leaders that are going to impact billions of people in the future. That's what that program helps kind of mold you guys into, right?
Right. Like we call ourselves the YC for people. Like, Y Combinator or any like Techstars, any of these awesome startups or startup accelerators are trying to train unicorn companies or companies that go out to impact billions, make billions, whatever it is. But TCAS is about training the people that are going to go out and start those companies. How do you get these skills? Because you look at the education systems, no one's teaching you how to deal with ambiguity, how to be collaborative, how to identify the biggest problems, and how to leverage technology. And that's really the thing that lets us scale on a mass. Like, technology is the first time in history where we can take an idea and then bring it to everyone super duper fast. It's like software. Like, you can write a couple lines of code and all of a sudden you have this massive impact. And so that's really the aim of TCAS. How do you teach kids the fundamentals to do all these big things in the world?
I love that. Oh my God, I love it.
Yeah.
And I know you guys are opening an LA chapter, so I'm definitely going to become a mentor for sure. Like, I'm so excited about what you guys are doing. So
next year we're opening in 4 more. So the goal is, so right now TCAS is in Boston, Ottawa, Las Vegas, New York, and Toronto. Next year going to LA, SF, Seattle, and Vancouver, and then eventually every major city in the world. And there's been some awesome results. Like, I've had the best time in this program, and it's like, who else gets to work on Sidewalk Labs as a 16-year-old? It's crazy. So,
no, and I love, and I think you're right. And I mean, I think you nailed it. Like, regular high school, you know, you guys are so above that, and like what they're teaching, you guys are probably so bored sitting in class. I can't even imagine.
Yeah,
so
sure.
This is kind of a perfect place for you guys to work on the world's biggest problems. And obviously urbanization is one of them. People are flocking to the major cities in the world. We already know how many people are going to live in cities in the future, and how are we going to accommodate all those people in an affordable manner. So let's dive into that. And I know you were kind enough to share kind of, you know, your incredible presentation with me, you know, privately for feedback. And it blew my mind. It's like how well thought out it was for co-living within Sidewalk Labs. Actually, before the co-living part, let's talk about the shared part. Because, you know, I emailed you right back and I was like, I didn't even know that number. So sharing large items, which actually our team has talked about internally on how, you know, how, again, if everybody's more nomadic and more minimalist, what about the big surfboards? You know, if you come into San Diego and you want to go surfing, you're not going to bring a big surfboard. Or what about camera equipment? What if we created a way through technology to share physical large items, right? And so that's some of the stats you had in the report. What was it? 300,000. The average person owns 3,000.
Yeah.
300,000.
300,000. Yeah. 300,000 items, and about 80% of them are used less than once a month. We couldn't get the stat for which ones are used less than a year. So you probably use about 5% of all your items, which means you're buying, like, for example, if you're a DJ and you DJ twice a year, you're going to have all this massive DJ equipment that you barely use, but it's still, like, you know, you have a microphone, you have your cables, you have your drums, or whatever you need to use. And that's like a ton of stuff. And then all of a sudden we live in this like consumer age. So we're always buying things. Like, I know even in my house, my mom's always coming home with like stuff that's on sale or whatever. And like, we don't even touch it. Like, we have a whole room in our basement that's just stuff that no one ever uses. But like, it's not like, first part to that is we don't even think that we have a lot of stuff. Like, we have these big homes to accommodate our stuff, but we don't even realize how much we're using. But the second part is like, we can't even understand how much it is. It's not like I can go on my phone. Like, if I wanted to, you know, check my bank account, I know how much money I have in my bank, but I don't know like what my items are, how much I'm using them. Maybe if I saw that I only used 80% of my items, or if I didn't use 80% of my items most of the time, maybe I'd consider if there was an option to sell them or an option to rent them to turn them into an income. And so I think we can't even audit our stuff. Therefore, they're just like piling in our homes. And so what we were looking into is how can you take everyone's items and share them with each other? Because there's so many things, like even books or whatever it is, there's so many things that we can share, and then we can turn that into a revenue stream. And the idea behind that was if everyone shared one item, like everyone just like rented whatever they needed. Maybe you have kids, instead of buying the new game that they're going to get bored of in 2 seconds, maybe someone else has it, vice versa, like whatever it is. And then we can turn that into a stream of money, and then you can reinvest that money to create an affordability fund, help cover and waive some of the development fees. Because right now in Toronto specifically, about 22% of the fees to build a building is just to pay back the government. So, and that's going to people's rental prices. But what if we could, like, as a sidewalk company or whatever, whoever is running the building, what if we can turn that and like help people with affordability issues and sort of waive that? That was the initial idea.
I love that. And
Yeah.
well, and you guys said that it was like 45, if you had a community, and again, this sharing economy with items works really well in like a dense, like a community with a lot of people. So you guys had said
Right.
4,500 people in a community sharing all their items. Is it all their items or part of their items? It was $60 million. So part of their items was 60 million in revenue?
Just for 3 categories. Yeah. So just for 3 categories. So we were thinking, okay, appliances, because people are more likely to share their, because I know like if you have a special dish that maybe you make once a year, maybe you have a specific party and then you need like some cake or whatever it is, like your birthday. and then you buy like a cake pan that you barely use, right? Like that is something that could be shared with everyone. Like, why do you just need that? So the first part is appliances. The second part is toys, because what Sidewalk is doing and what we should be aiming for in the future is just multi-generational living, like getting kids and whoever, like even if it's separated, like how can we get more families into these spaces? Because ultimately they're the ones that need affordability the most. Like, yeah, there's like a missing middle, like there's no family options. But if we have families, kids only use 5% of their toys. Most of the time, I think the stat is like 30%, once you have a kid, 30% of your home just becomes like a playground, a space for the child's items. And so instead of constantly buying these items, what if we could just share them all? And that creates like a shared daycare, share whatever. And then the third stream of that is clothing, because, you know, Rent the Runway, all these place things are great, clothing rentals. But the big problem with all of them is just logistics. Like if I want to rent a dress from someone halfway across Toronto, it might take me an hour to get there. But if I want to rent to my neighbor, Sidewalk already has the infrastructure to share within each other. Like they're building these robots that can deliver your storage units. So everyone has storage units, and then anytime you need stuff, you just get the robot and the robot comes. Very futuristic. But what if I wanted to borrow someone else's storage stuff? They already have the infrastructure, so you just like tap a button and then you can have whatever you need right at your door.
I love that. And not to mention this space, right? So then you're saving space in your apartment. You're not buying, you're not getting a 2-bedroom apartment because you need the second bedroom to store more stuff and to have the extra closet for clothes. So you're actually saving on space too and on rent. So just, yeah, the sharing economy for sure. I am a massive fan. Diving in a little more to Sidewalk Labs now. It's funny. I know there's all these like privacy issues. I know that like the project is getting some bad press lately, and maybe is it getting delayed at all, or no? It's still moving.
TBD. It's
Okay.
still moving. It's still moving. I don't know. Like I'm not that familiar with the press, but I think when it comes to privacy, like there's a lot of things we can do with privacy. Like the concern people mostly have is their data. But then now we have these like new technologies like blockchain. Like what if you could see exactly where your data goes and then like tell them, no, you can't use my data in this specific circumstance. But we're giving our data away all the time. Like it doesn't, for me, it's like, if you buy like any app, like it doesn't matter what company they want your data, they're going to sell that data when you like sign all the terms and conditions. I think people are just especially scared because it's like Alphabet and Google. But I think like they'll be able to overcome it because there's just such a high demand. There's such a high demand. People need housing. If they can add in some safety features and make them feel, part of it is maybe they don't feel like they have ownership in their home. Because if they go home and they can't even own like equity, and then they'd rather buy a house in the suburb than in the city. But if they can own equity, if they can have ownership over the rules and what happens in their home and design their interiors of their home, and then have ownership over what their data is used, maybe they'll be more okay with privacy and data. So I think there's a way we can approach it. We just have to think about how do we use technology and communication to tell people, yeah, you're going to be okay, and then help meet that demand at the same time.
And I think it's a generational thing, I'm sure, right? So like, as you guys are used to like clicking through these terms and conditions and like not reading them. It doesn't matter. I guess I think back, when we're using old school phone books and we're looking for weird things. Well, nobody would have ever known. Okay. Now people are using Google to search for things like for free, right? It's a free service for them to use, but then they have the history of your search history. I think there's a Black Mirror episode where it's like they let that history out or something, but wow. So again, I think we just get comfortable with like giving away, just saying, okay, it's convenience. Like I would trade, like I would be okay living there, and there's sensors in the city and it's monitoring different things to create efficiencies in how we're living. I'm totally fine with that personally. But I think again, the younger generations coming up, it's like, oh, no big deal. Because the people I see having the issues are actually a lot older. So I think it's just technology is changing so quickly. They're like, whoa, what's going on? Is there any other interesting things that you see that they're going to be doing? And that's such a great piece of land in Toronto. It's right waterside. Yeah. Toronto needs it more than anything because that city's growing so quickly. Are there any other cool initiatives that you're able to talk about that you've noticed on when working with them?
Some like I really like the new like timber project. What they're working on new materials to build the buildings. One of the main regulatory concerns is right now their plans are to build really high, like highest mass timber building ever, and that's like a concern because they don't have the regulations to build that high yet. But I find like looking for new material, because part of the like, I think like 30 to whatever, 50% of cost to build a building is construction. And so really to make affordability, you need demand. And to do demand, you need two things. You either need to build the demand faster, so streamline the construction process, or build more in a given space. So one building, instead of being 50 units, it's 100 units of worth of people and whatever it is. So I find it interesting that they're they're thinking about the how do we build more in a given space, and they're thinking about the construction side of things. Like obviously there's like 1,000-page report for Sidewalk, so there's tons of stuff, but a lot of it, like I see there's tons of potential when you integrate sensors and like different price analytic tools or whatever it is, because right now we don't have much control over our utilities or whatever we're buying, and then oftentimes the price can get inflated, or like we don't have full control over our costs. And I think as they implement different technologies, we will be able to get different controls. And so I see it as an exciting future platform to integrate machine learning or whatever it is to dramatically reduce costs.
And would you live there?
For people in there.
Would you live
Absolutely.
there?
Absolutely. Oh,
Yeah.
100%.
I knew it.
Yeah. Because I think it's so, like, for me, as a young person, like, I'm like, how am I ever going to afford housing in such an awesome big city? Like, I want to live in San Francisco or New York or Toronto or Dubai or Amsterdam or wherever it is. But obviously the prices are getting so high that it's like, oh, I can't even afford property. And so how can we, I mean, I personally don't need like a massive house, mansion, whatever. I'm totally cool with small living, co-living, all this stuff. And so for me, it's exciting because there's not that many big scale co-living projects in Toronto. And right now co-living is more of a short-term thing. If I think about like my home and the place I want to live, I want to be able to customize that space and make it mine rather than have it more like hotel-y or like already pre-customized. Like that's just a personal preference if I want to live there for a long time. And right now that doesn't seem to exist. And so a project like Sidewalk, where they want it to be a long-term thing, where they want people to call this home, not like a 6-month, 12-month stay or whatever it is. So I think it's really exciting. It's a concept that I'm really passionate about, really, really pumped. And so I totally would live there.
I love that. Okay. And then that's a perfect segue to the next question I had for you, which you talked about in the report, was the fractional ownership, which everybody knows I've talked about a million times. And then the rent and rent to equity. Like on the show, I'm like telling everybody, just please somebody do fractional ownership or like rent to equity for the co-living model, because that would make it even more impressive. Right. Yeah. So what are your thoughts about that?
I agree. For sure. I agree. I think it's crazy how we haven't done that yet. Like we have it's like we have I was talking to a bunch of people. So I spent like the past 3 weeks, like talking to tons of professionals, whether like in co-living or just in real estate in general. And I was like, so what are what is stopping us from doing fractional ownership? There's not like significant regulatory challenges. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because my hypothesis was probably some regulations, some rules, or whatever it is. Like the main one in Canada is all the land registries are separate. So there's like 55 in Ontario, which is the province that Toronto's in. And so to connect them all and create like a real estate market that can be fractional as a province is really hard. But what could happen for Sidewalk is they could just own the building as like a corporation and then have people buy shares into the building and then eventually build that up. The main concern with that is how you can produce liquidity. Like how do you, once you sell it, how do you get the money back? But like with interesting models and financial models, people have figured it's almost like a stock market for housing. I like to think about it as. So I think I don't know why we haven't done that. Part of it is it's capital intensive, but Alphabet and Sidewalk does have the capital. Yeah. So I think it could be a really, like if you think about like a co-living startup, it's way harder for them to buy up. Like they first have to prove the concept. Like that's the main challenge with it. But when you're starting from a massive company, then you can afford the capital to have the building. And then now you can offer this new, interesting shared model with like very little regulatory challenges. But the other challenge that could pop up is with mortgages. So if you have 4 people living in one like co-living space and one person defaults on their payments, then like, oh, how does the bank come in and take 25% of an apartment? Because normally it's just like a foreclosure, they take it away. And so that's the main concern from the mortgage side. But if they do it with shares, there's some interesting ways to go about that. But I'm like totally for it.
Yeah. I mean, it's coming. I know it's coming because I'm hearing more and more people talk about it, trying to kind of sketch it out. How would it work? I just haven't seen it executed really well quite yet. There hasn't been that like one player to rise to the top to say, and again, you're right. It's like every city, you know, different countries are going to have different ways of doing this, I'm sure. So yeah, thank you for telling, because everybody from around the world listens to the show. So I'm so glad you were specific on your guys' what you guys do in Canada.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I know even with accredited investors, like sometimes there's that regulatory, I think they're just trying to work around that, even here in the States. So let's, again, I know I was telling Izzy before we started, I'm like, I have so many notes, so many things I want to talk about. And just FYI for people listening, because everybody says I have a lot of energy, like you have a ton of energy too. Neither one of us have had coffee this morning either. Thank God, because then we'd be really
Nope.
hyper. No coffee,
Really
no
bad.
coffee. Okay, so let's see here. You know, with co-living, what were some of your other findings? Again, like you said, you've spent 3 weeks, talking to a lot of different leaders in the space, real estate. What were some other really interesting findings that you had that kind of surprised you?
Yeah, so I was talking to one person that has gone to every co-living or almost every co-living facility in the world. And he was telling me about, I also talked to a bunch of seniors about affordability in housing. And he was like, yeah, there's such a huge demand for boomer housing or multi-generational or whatever you want to call it, like people other than young people, essentially. It just doesn't exist. And then I was talking to like other founders, et cetera. And they were like, the biggest problem is proving that the business model works. And so I found that like, yeah, we have this huge demand for other demographics, not just young people, but we still have to prove. So it just seemed like there's like so much opportunity to fulfill co-living for other needs, and specifically boomers. But then the second part of it is I found it really interesting how most co-living places so far have been designed to be more short-term, even though there's a massive long-term demand. And then I was thinking, well, there's so many other interesting technologies that we can integrate, like blockchain for fractional ownership or whatever, or like shared economy, create these like item solutions. So it seemed very, the industry, like I'm obviously really excited about it, but right now it seems very concentrated on like a niche market specific style. And so that's why I was really excited about what you guys are doing, because it's like co-living, but from a different angle. It's like, how do we get the software to enable it? And I think there's so many enablement opportunities. Like I was thinking about, okay, how do we match people better? Like what if we could use psychology and better algorithms to match people to maximize whatever they're dealing, like how do we maximize people to get along and enjoy their time? Other part of it, like tokenized time. I was like, oh, it's interesting how we aren't doing that yet. There's some concepts in the US that took students from different musical schools and they brought them into elderly homes or like co-living-esque facilities. And what they were doing is the students would play music for like a certain amount of hours, almost like volunteering, and then they get free housing stay. So it's like, yeah, their time is tokenized and then now they can use that towards their rent. And I was like, yeah, that's another interesting one. So I think there's a lot of interesting things that could be used within co-living to enable some of the key challenges, like getting people to stay longer and filling in the vacancy rates, because that's how we pay back the investors. Like, what are the key problems? And then I talked to a bunch of people that are just like regular customers. Like, why wouldn't you want co-living? And then I found it interesting. Like most people, like my hypothesis before was, oh, people that are older or just not part of like the Gen Z millennial generation would probably be more opposed to it. But even after talking to like low income families, middle income, whatever, they were like oddly like they were like, yeah, I would potentially give that a shot if I like actually got to build my own ownership or whatever their variables were to it. So I found that really cool. And then it just kind of opened my eyes to, there's a lot to this industry and there's a lot of untapped potential. And even though often we just call it glorified roommates or whatever, just like concept, but I actually think like there's so much more to it than that. And from like a climate and sustainability, because I'm for the past year I've been working in food technology because it's 25% of like the climate problem, and I just think the way we make food sucks. And then I also think the way we live sucks, because we're living in these big homes, like 9 to 5, your house is empty. Why aren't we using these spaces? Which is like, I could go off. But anyway, we're not using our spaces, so much untapped potential. I think there's like a lot we can do with it, and there's a lot we're not doing right now, which I found very surprising.
Yeah, no, and you're right, especially with the climate change and the wasted space. Like, why are we not using the space we already have? These massive houses, especially in the States, that we
Yeah.
barely use. You're right. And then everybody's off to work. And so, but with co-living, there's always people in the home. They're usually working, there's co-working space. So it's kind of like you're working in there during the day sometimes and using the house as much as you can. And like going back to like the roommate matching algorithms, I just was having coffee and we were making jokes. Cause again, like my brilliant co-founder, I mean, like 2 years ago, he was talking about, roommate matching algorithms similar to like eHarmony, because those were really, that's a big
Yeah.
questionnaire. And that's a massive algorithm pairing people for love, right? and it's legit. But right now, some co-living operators, I'm not saying which ones, oh, we use AI to match you with roommates. But like literally they ask 2 questions, like, are you a morning person or a night person? Do you like cats or dogs? And I'm like, there's no artificial intelligence. Like it's probably a human like answering that, pairing people together, because it was 2 questions and we were just like cracking up. So I think there's definitely ways to use technology, possibly, but sometimes you just need to do it. Yeah, that was, again, it was a great like meeting with this person, because we were kind of going back and forth. Like, do you think that a computer can still match people appropriately and that it would actually work out, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think, well, right now, I think it's like, we still have to develop the algorithms. I was looking into fuzzy logic recently, which basically, like often we use words like, oh, this person is tall. Well, what does tall mean? Because right now an algorithm is very binary. You want it to be like 0 or 1, tall or short. But then how do you know, like, how much tallness do people have? And so the fuzzy approach is, how do you take the attribute of tallness and then make it like, you essentially simplify it to, oh, very tall. Yes, tall. And then the algorithm can understand like generalizations and labels with fuzzy logic. And so I'm thinking, are there different ways to, I don't know, understanding people is a tough challenge. But I think if we can figure out how to turn those inputs into something computerized, I don't think it's impossible. It might be, but I think if we give it a shot, I think we could figure it out. But is that worth the effort? Is that worth the time? Is there a market? Like, there's always these economics behind it. So I don't know if that's the most pressing challenge I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit we can do with co-living. Just from like, I take everything from a very what about this possibilities, because I basically spent like the past year and a half looking into all these emerging technologies for the sole purpose of just understanding what their potential is. So thinking about like, if I see a situation, can I it's almost like, how do I optimize myself for judging the status quo and then making it better? Like, if I learn about something, can I think, oh, what if we use edge computing to speed up the latency, or whatever it is? Like, if I can have all these technologies in the toolbox, I can now conceive of other possibilities. But most people don't even have that in their toolbox. Most people, like, to your point, like AI, we say, oh, matching different things is AI. Like, that is not like actually the potential of AI. And like, even people, I think people are generally scared. We just portray AI or whatever it is, technology, in a very negative way. Like, when I'm talking to other teenagers and young people, they're afraid. They're like, oh, I don't want to go into artificial intelligence because we have to solve other problems like climate change or whatever. But I think these are the tools that are going to solve the problems. And most people don't even understand or know what the tools are. And if you don't know what the tools are, how can you even conceive of these other possibilities? Like, if you don't know what blockchain is, it's going to be hard to figure out fractional ownership. If you don't know what computer vision is, it's going to be hard to make an autonomous car. But with these tools, I think they are going to unlock so many things. And I also think, like, there's so many hard problems in the world that we literally could not have solved without these things. Like, if you think about e-commerce, without the internet, there would literally be no E in commerce, right? And so how do we figure out what the tools are that are going to enable us to live smaller, therefore get the outcome of being more affordable, being more sustainable, or whatever outcome we're trying to drive? So that's sort of, yeah, anyway, tangent.
No, Izzy, I love it. And that's like one of my favorite quotes, is like, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Was that Peter Drucker, right? Yeah, I love it. And that's so true. It's like, you just create the future and just think big, and I like, or zoom out and then zoom back in and actually execute, because sometimes I see that missing. People dream and predict. I love, you said, like, on your website, the first thing I saw was like futurist and then activist, like, I'm like, and blogger, and I'm like, okay, and just, you're actually executing. I know you spoke at Web Summit, and that's a massive, we're going to put the link in the show notes for people watching and listening. Cool. Yeah, so we'll put her website, of course, but yeah, Web Summit, I mean, that's a massive event in Lisbon. What was it, 70,000 people?
Yeah, it was really huge. It was a really, really awesome time. We got to hang out with some of the, like, literally smartest people in the world. I found it was really, really awesome.
And what about taking the stage? I mean, you rocked it. It's on YouTube. I watched the whole thing. I loved it. You killed it. Were you nervous at all? You didn't seem nervous at all.
For the past year, I've been doing different conferences around the world. Like, I was at Microsoft's largest conference, tens of thousands of their employees at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. That was probably the most nervous I've ever been. But then after that, I've been doing a lot more conferences. Spoke at IKEA's largest festival in Copenhagen in October. Different things. So, I mean, I don't really because I just get really excited. In your brain, nervousness and excitement are the same thing. And so I just always turn everything to be fun and positive. Like, yeah, I get to learn from this experience. I get to have this experience. I'm grateful for this experience. So I'm just going to this experience because there's no other, I don't want there to be the other option. That's kind of how I think about
Oh
it.
my God, I say the same thing. That's so funny. I say that it is exactly the same energy, nervousness and excitement. I always tell people
Yeah.
that. It feels exactly the same. So you just have to trick your brain to say, okay, I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited. I'm not nervous. And because it's
I think
exactly
there's a,
the feeling.
yeah, I was going to say, I think there's a lot of things that we just have to switch. Like when one quote, I don't know if you watched How I Met Your Mother,
Oh
but
yeah,
one of the
every
characters,
episode.
yeah, oh, same. One of my mentors told me this and I really resonate with it. It's like, cause I like Barney. And then Barney, one episode, like, oh, when I'm sad, I just think about being Barney and then I'm just happy again. It's like, yeah. And then whenever I'm like sad or upset or whatever it is, I just think, wow, my life is like, I'm actually so grateful. I get to learn about these technologies. I get to think about how can I identify big problems and then execute on those problems. And I just get really excited again. And so I think there's a lot of things that we have to switch, similar to the co-living issue, right? Right now it's mainly stigma. I talk to 15 plus founders, a bunch of operators, people in real estate, and everyone's like, yeah, the problem is the stigma. It's the people thinking, oh, I could never live with a roommate. Because if you think about the way our society is almost built right now, you go to elementary school, junior school, high school, and then you go to university or college, and then, you know, in college, you're like a broke college student, so you're going to live with roommates, and that's acceptable. But then you're expected after to get a job at Wall Street or whatever your career trajectory is, and then you're going to move to the suburbs, have a family, whatever. Like, the way we see our lives is we go from living at home to living with roommates to living bigger and bigger in the suburbs and then retiring there. And I think when we introduce co-living for like people with families or people that are older, people, it's almost like you're going backwards. And that's what creates the stigma, because we have this big expectation in society to move a certain way. And now we're saying, oh, no, don't do that. Let's move a different way. I think that's really hard for people, just because we are so used to doing the same thing over and over again. Now we're imposing change. But I do think if we can figure out a way to flip everyone's switch and get people more open to it, and just, I feel like one thing that we haven't started doing is we haven't started talking to people to figure out what they want. Because oftentimes they think they have an idea of what they want, and they think like they know what their house should look like, whatever, but maybe they just want a place for their kids to grow up, to be happy or whatever. Like that could also be in a community or whatever it is. So there's people constantly changing their mind and just figuring out how can we facilitate that. And part of it is getting them involved in the process, because you want them to be emotionally tied to it. If someone it's almost like if you did the Inca Trail to climb Machu Picchu, or if you went on the train, if you spent 4 days like hiking and camping or whatever, all of a sudden the top view is going to be 10, like thousands of times better than if you took a 20-minute train up there. And right now, I think for like, as we're designing co-living spaces, we're taking the 20-minute train. People, you know, they go to the co-living space and they have it fully furnished. They weren't part of the process. But whereas you can take families and onboard them, understand their needs, understand their design, build them custom furniture, let them choose the colors of the walls or whatever it is in their private spaces, all of a sudden they built this thing. And like building stuff for yourself just feels way better. Like even when I was working on different projects, like I enjoyed the process of figuring out how to write my own code or figuring out how to build the thing I wanted to build or whatever it is. And so I think that figuring out and being part of the process, sweating and pain, is one thing we can use to flip people's minds and tackle the stigma.
Yeah. And then I saw you guys drafted a list of questions that you guys are going to ask.
Yeah.
Like, how many people are you guys going to go out and survey?
Yeah, for sure. I think, so what we were focusing on 3 specific demographics that we saw, like based on talking to people and research. It was pretty clear that there's tons of potential for family co-living, for senior and retiree co-living, and then for young single people. Right now it's optimized for young single people, but mostly right now it's more short term, depending on where you stay. Like some places, you know, have 3 month, 6 month or 12-month leases. Some places you can stay for one night. And so we were looking for specifically, how can you get young people to buy into co-living and then eventually be able to adapt. So maybe they get a significant other, maybe they start having kids. Like how can they still live in the same space but adapt? Part of that is people want to build ownership. So how can you let them start buying into shares, building their equity, and then eventually living in like a modular space where they can upgrade, but then still be in the same property, building neighborhood. But anyway, we wanted to understand more of that. So I mean, it's still to be decided on how many people to survey, but I honestly think the more the better, because then you got a better data pool, you get a better understanding. But it also depends like who, because within like families, there's different types of families. Do you want families with lots of kids, or do you want families with just one kid? Do you want families that are more low income, or do you want more middle income families? Do you want families that are immigrants, or do you want families that are not immigrants? Like there's different types. So I think there's different demographics you need to further select down. So there's a lot of things we want to look into. But I would say like we wanted to do like a pilot for one co-living facility. So based on current research studies for each group, there's a certain amount of people want to live with. Like families would like to live with 10 to 25 people. So like a cohort of families would be 25. And so we were thinking, oh, what if we did like 2 cohorts, see how that compared, so like 50 for each one. But that was a long answer. So
No.
don't know.
I love it. I love all this. No, and you nailed it. So you're right. You need like a big data set. You need to just,
For sure.
and having the buy-in of the actual user. And like, that reminds me, I've had this conversation with multiple developers. They're in their 50, 60-year-old range. And they're like, oh, Christine, we're building our facility with big bedrooms for the co-livers, because we just see the product shrinking and shrinking. And I'm like, listen, right? I'm like, these co-livers are traveling, they're working crazy hours, or they're eating out, or they're hanging out with friends. They're very seldom in the, if you talk to them, they're like, oh no, we don't care about the size of the bedroom. Like, I'm just there to sleep. Like, and I'm the same way. Like, I'm only in my room if I'm sleeping. Like, I don't need a big, massive bedroom. And I've had big, massive bedroom, and it was like a waste of space. And these developers are kind of going back and forth. I'm like, well, did you ask again, they're building from the ground up, but they never surveyed anybody, and they don't know their avatar. They don't know the clients they're going after. So, I'm always like, and again, this has been a conversation I've had more than once. I'm like, okay, it's not the big bedrooms that are going to sell your co-living. It's the community, it's the people that are in there. And so again, it'll just be a time, I think we only have a couple years in, so there's not enough history to see, or again, for those listening or watching, when you're planning your community, if you are a real estate developer or investor, please survey your the clientele you think are going to live there. Because more than not, every time I talk to the co-livers, they do not care about that. Well, now they're sleeping in pods, right? And we've had them on the show.
Right.
The Japanese style beds, they're pods, bunk beds, whatever you want to call them. And again, they're doing it because now they get to live like walking distance to the Venice Beach, or they're in the heart of Hollywood, and they love it. So, and they have a recording studio, and they have all this really cool amenities that that's kind of the give and take, I think.
Right. I don't know. Like, yeah, I think that's one interesting approach. But when it comes to like, there's different types of people. Like, you probably won't build that facility for families, or you probably won't build that facility for, so I think it's also like, I was talking to some companies that have multiple buildings within each city. They were telling me about how, like, in San Francisco, there's some neighborhoods that are super hippie. So the people that live there are totally different than the people that live in like right in the tech sector, right? Like near the Google or the Apple or whatever it is. So you got different people, and then those facilities might be, because the people living in the tech sector probably want like a more convenient type style, because we're like, tech people are always working, or actually no, that's not such a bad generalization, but anyway, like startup founders,
it's a true one.
I like working. I personally like don't like anything else, but it's just so, I don't know, it's just so enjoyable. But anyway, like I don't spend any time in my room, right? So I don't care that much, and I want stuff to be convenient. Whereas like someone that's super like loves neat art or whatever it is, like very cool people that I can't draw for my life, but maybe they want like an interesting space to be creative, or a space to paint, or whatever it is. So I think we have to think about like intercity and intergenerational, like within a generation, what are the specific nuances, and then how do you design for that? And I just don't think we have enough data to figure that out right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's definitely, and no, talk about, so you're at an office right now. Cause I know I asked you this already. I'm like, where's school? Are you in school? What's going on? So you advance to where you get to take a year off, right? So you're not in high school right now.
Yeah. So what I did is last year I just smushed 2 grades in one. And then this year I just am taking some online courses. But other than that, just love learning a bunch. I just love learning. And so that's kind of what I'm up to. So spending a whole year learning.
I love it. And you're kicking butt, and you're doing such rad stuff. I was like blown away by the stuff you've sent me. And just the first time we talked, I was like, I love everything you're doing. So let's see here. Obviously reducing the cost of living in Toronto is a passion of yours. And then you want to travel. Do you want to stay in Toronto, or you want to kind of jump around?
Jump around. 100%.
Okay.
I want to see the world. I want to try new things.
Okay. Out of curiosity, because I tell people this too, I'm like, I ask teenagers, like, would you ever sign a year lease? Like, would you ever sign a year lease to be in one spot for an entire year? Out of curiosity.
Depends on what stage in my life. Like right now, probably not. Because obviously I can't own anything. But later on, I potentially could. Like if I'm starting a company somewhere, then I might want to stay in one spot, but I could consider it.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Because yeah, most are like, no way, like no, like 3 months is too long because they want to jump quicker, or they don't even want to jump. They just want the like freedom. I think they don't want to be like locked into something.
True.
Okay,
That's fair.
interesting. Yeah. So again, I try to ask different people at different ages that question for sure. And then let me see here. So let's see what other, I think we covered all my crazy questions. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about? I know you have so many things going on. You're super passionate, and it's so much fun just to kind of bounce ideas with you about, the future of living and co-living, and especially, on Sidewalk. What other things excite you about co-living in general?
I think I see co-living as, well, part of it is like the climate side of things. Like how do we get people to be more efficient with their space and time? Like even like for climate change in particular, I think the way we approach the problem right now is there's so many low-hanging fruit that we could completely just tackle and change, but we're not doing it. And I think one of them is changing the way we live, being more efficient with our utilities and our hydro or whatever it is. And so I kind of see it as it's more than just like a community to live with, or like I think there's a community aspect to it that might not be the biggest selling point for people. Like some people might not care that much about being in a very extroverted social environment. Other people might be more introverted and into different things. So I really see it as how do we be more efficient as a society with our space? And then the other one is like, even if I'm thinking about offices and office spaces, a lot of offices are empty most of the time. And on the weekends, who uses their office? Like, why can't we turn those spaces into other things? So bringing it sort of back to TKS, one of the things we do is we host our programs on the weekends in different offices. Like in Boston, we're at a Microsoft. In New York, we're at a Microsoft. In Vegas, we're at a Zappos. In Toronto, we're at a PwC. In Ottawa, different like incubator hubs, HubSpot. And so there's a lot of interesting things that we do on the weekends. We take these office spaces that are beautiful and they're furbished and they look really nice, they're innovative, they have cool whiteboards, and we turn them into this next generation learning center where people are literally trying to solve some of the biggest problems. And it's like, okay, you take this space that literally isn't used, and then you make it, you remake it, you turn it into something else. Similar, like let's say we had a co-living facility with a bunch of families, and there was a playroom area, and then it had like transferable furniture. So by night it could be a living room, and then by day it could be a daycare, right? Like how do we make different spaces and transfer different things? So that's sort of my big thing. How do we use space better? Because right now I don't think we're good at using space. I don't think we're good at using most of our resources. And if you think about a lot of our problems, just we are really bad at using our resources, and we're always trying to optimize for resource use. Like we're always trying to use less energy or use whatever. And I think this is just one way to optimize our resources.
Love it. Well, Isabella, that is a perfect place to end this interview.
Awesome.
And I will have all her contact info, like a website, information, links on the show notes. If you guys want to reach out to her, definitely keep an eye out. I know you're going to do amazing things in this near future. And we're cheering you on, excited to watch. And thanks so much.
Thanks.
Okay, bye. Thank you so much for checking out today's episode. If you want to learn more about co-living, you could check out my book on Amazon, The Co-Living Code. And of course, if you're looking for the perfect software to power your co-living concept, check out kindred.io, KNDRD.io. Thanks. And a quick thank you to SPX Agency for all of the graphics, animation, and design on our YouTube channel.